Welcome to the Mental Sentinel Podcast, episode 2, March 22nd, 2020. Today we're going to talk about a couple things. Past pandemics, and how Mitchell got its name, or how it became to be. But anyways, let me introduce my father, Dan Cannon. What do you got for us today, Dad?
Well, I just kind of wanted to tell people that we have survived pandemics before. We got this thing going on with this COVID-19 coronavirus. It brings back to mind in 1892 we had a diphtheria epidemic out on West Branch, and it affected mostly little children and kids, and the Mansfields lost four kids, and the Taylor kids lost two of them died. The Taylors, as soon as they buried these kids on West Branch, they went immediately back, left everything in the house, and just set it on fire and burned it, and they relocated down to Bridge Creek and restarted their lives. But my grandmother, my great-grandmother, Angie Lewis, she had 5 siblings, and they were all girls, and they just lived up the creek from the Taylors and the Mansfields. So their parents put them into kind of a quarantine isolation thing. They had an old cabin about 4 miles from the original place, so they stocked it up with what they could. And so Grandma went up, and she being the oldest, she was 13 years old. I think for about 6 to 8 weeks, she cooked and took care of her younger sisters, and they all survived. So the quarantine really works, is what I'm saying. And so if you want to isolate yourself, it works the best.
Well, we're natural out here, being self-distancing, or what, practice self-distancing. I don't know what they're calling it exactly today, but yeah, it's a natural country thing. But it seemed to work pretty good in that case.
Yeah, they up here, people don't like to get people too close to them anyway. I mean, they kind of maintain that 6-foot barrier anyway, because they just don't want to get too close to anybody.
Well, that just kind of makes sense when you live in the country.
Yeah, but I just wanted to reassure people that we went through some of this stuff before, and we'll make it again. They had a flu epidemic later on, but we survived that one also. Now, back to Mitchell. Now, Mitchell was started. There's quite a few different. There's a couple different interpretations of it, but I.N. Sargent, he's the first one to settle in Mitchell. He built his house downtown. I guess the year would be about 1867, and he knew that. The reason he built this house there, he knew that this area was isolated, and to survive here, you had to just about bring everything with you or grow whatever you needed here to survive this country, because it was a harsh country, and the nearest place to get supplies was the Dalles. So that was, sometimes maybe 6-7 day trip in a wagon. He did it because of the water, like I said, and he raised a big garden, and he started an orchard, and he had all this stuff going.
So that was right down in the canyon here? Or?
Right where it narrows. Yeah, people would say, man, why did somebody do that? But he didn't know that until 1884 that water can also be a curse. That's when they had the first flood and washed away part of the settlement then. It wasn't as harsh as some of the ones later on, but it was enough to give them a pretty stern warning.
But it wasn't, he didn't just build the town out of the blue. There was the Dalles Canyon City Military Road that was just outside of town, right?
It was about
before the town.
Yeah, it was probably 2 mile, well, I guess mile and a half maybe north of where Mitchell is. It went up parallel Myers Canyon and come up through that way, and then crossed over and didn't even come into Mitchell. But the reason it did come into Mitchell because a guy by the name of Brody Johnson, he started a livery stable here, and to do that, he also decided he'd just better get a post office, so he had to have a name. So he came up with the name Mitchell, which was the national senator, which was appointed by the state at the time. So H.H. Mitchell. He named it after Mitchell, and Mitchell was kind of dubious character, which I'll get into later on. He in some of the land deals, he was kind of a scallywag, and so they got this. As they got the Dallas Military Road going, Wheeler, he came up from California, and he'd seen the transportation needs down there, so he was kind of on the ground floor. So he started a stage stop here in 1864, and the stage line ran from the Dalles to Canyon City to supply the gold miners. And also at this time, after he got it established, he got the mail contract, for which he was paid $12,000 a year to do, which was big money back in those days. And by that time, with Johnson building the livery stable, and right across the road was the infamous Palace Saloon. And the Palace Saloon was morphed out of what we call the other story of how Mitchell got named. It was named after the infamous Mitchell wagon, which was the Cadillac of wagons back in the day. And they were hauling freight through here, and I said they had the staples of life. They had a side of bacon, a bag of beans, and a couple other items, but they had 10 barrels of whiskey, that being the staples for life of the miners in Canyon City. Well, he was going along, and he broke a wagon pretty close to here, and he broke his wheel. And fearing native evaporations, if he left to go try to retrieve another wheel, he just took the sideboard off the Mitchell wagon and placed it between two whiskey barrels, and he started his saloon. And pretty soon the guys would ride back and forth, and we said, "Where are you going today, Jim?" I said, "Well, I think I'll ride with Mitchell and get me a drink." So that's the legend, and the legend proves to be fits our needs a little more than a crooked politician.
I agree. We got plenty of those as it is.
Yeah, and now they had the road came through, and it was on a thoroughfare in the days, which was not much, but it was at least something.
So they actually diverted the Dallas Military Road up through the canyon here.
At first, they just brought a spur road off from it and everything, but as they got Wheeler needed work on his wagon, or stagecoach, and the freight wagons needed work on them and everything, with Johnson establishing a livery stable, and he was able to do the mechanics for the wagons and the horses, so they could do the maintenance. And the saloon right across the street was a pretty good idea too, so that kind of put it on the.
Well, did that make the stage stop in Myers Canyon obsolete, or did they still?
No,
stop
they still use that.
Okay.
That was Alkali Frank Hewlett and Christian Myers, and they were famous for their food because they raised a lot of their own truck, and they put out some great meals, and people really loved the meals, so they really look forward to stopping there. And I'll tell you another little kind of a sidebar on that thing. In the springtime, when the grass got green and everything, they would Myers and Hewlett would take their cows. They had quite a bunch of milk cows, and they'd take them up towards Badger Creek or Mountain Creek.
Up towards Ochocos, right?
Yeah, right. And the meadow grass up there was greening up real good, and so they'd take them cows up there and feed them on the meadows, and they devised the way even to, after they made their butter and their cheese up there, they devised the way by running the cool water through this box and everything to keep it and preserve it, so it would keep it good enough so they could get it back down here to their stage stop.
I'll be dang.
So, it's a pretty neat deal. They, let's see, where else are we going with this?
Oh, you're talking about the livery stable across from the Palace Saloon.
Yeah, that was old Brody Johnson, yeah, and he was the first postmaster. And now, in 1862, they had the Homestead Act, which means if you would stake a piece of ground, 160 acres, and you established a residence and paid the filing fee, and you kept it for 5 years, and it became your piece of property. And there was 160 million acres included in this Homestead Act, and there was 1.6 million homesteaders who claimed these acres.
Now that's just throughout the West, right?
Yeah, throughout the West. Most of this land was from the west of the Mississippi, and when they granted you this land and everything, but there was Indians here, and so that caused quite a problem because they didn't want these homesteaders on their land. And then also you had the large cowmen. This was free range for them. They could run their cows up here, so it created quite a turbulence. And sometimes those cowmen early on would say, "Hey, man, you don't want to settle up here. These Indians are just terrible up here, and they just scalping people and pillaging and raping and doing all this stuff," which they were, but not to that sense that they could
well, yeah, they're probably
them.
Pretty pissed that the white man was coming into the area anyways, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Hence all the wars, Chief Plana and all that.
Yeah. So in this Homestead Act also they put these people weren't stupid. They got to have water on this thing. So they filed on all the best land, and the Indians, they kind of got stuck with what was left. And after a while, they realized that they were kind of getting a short shaft, and I ain't meaning an arrow either. But
the Indians?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And so they created a little more problems. So the government came in, and the ones that the Indians that didn't die from disease or bullets were pushed into the sorriest part of the land called reservations.
Yeah. Well, that's we can go into that whole thing another time. I suppose.
Right. Yeah.
I've studied quite a bit of that in college.
Yeah, which turned out to be a pretty good plus for the Indians, because a lot of we'll get into this later, but just to let you know that a lot of these Indians settled on the sorry land, but unfortunately there was a lot of oil underneath these lands. They did find out later when the technology
But that was more towards the Midwest.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we're trying to get regional specific here.
Yeah. Let's see, what else we got here? Yeah, Mitchell had they had the gold, and the people were flocking up there, so that meant more of them came.
So the gold that was found near here was up at Antone and Canyon
City, and some up at Prairie City also, and down the Powder River. As the gold played out in Canyon City, they kind of branched out and everything, but while they were there, they said, well, hey, I didn't find any gold, but hey, I think I'll stake some land. It's 160 acres of free land, but this free land wasn't free. It turned out to be kind of sorry, and I came across this song in an old songbook I had, and I'd like to do this song here.
Do you know the tune?
I don't know the tune, but I'm going to do it as a poem.
Oh, okay. Thank God.
Yeah, that might be a plus. Hurrah for Wheeler County, the land of the free, the home of the bedbug, the grasshopper, and the flea. I'll sing to its praise and boast of its fame, the starving to death on a government claim. My clothes are ragged, my language is rough, my bread is case-hardened, solid and tough. But I have a good time and live at my ease on common sorghum and old bacon grease. Now happy I am when I crawl into bed with rattlesnakes rattling just under my head. That little gay bedbug so cheerful and bright, he keeps me a-going 2/3 of the night. Now happy I am on my government claim. I've nothing to lose and I've nothing to gain. I've nothing to eat and nothing to wear, and nothing from nothing is honest and fair. Oh, come to Wheeler County, there's room for you all, where the wind never stops and the rains never fall. Oh, join in the chorus and sing of her fame, a starving to death on a government claim. Oh, don't be downhearted, you poor hungry man. I'll just as free as pigs in a pen. Just stick to your homestead and fight with your fleas and pray to your maker to send some more breeze. Now all you poor sinners, I hope you will stay and chaw on your hardtack till you're toothless and gray. But as for me, I don't aim to remain and slave like a dog on no government claim. Farewell to Wheeler County, the pride of the West. I'm going back east to the gal that I love best. I'll stop in Missouri and get me my wife and live on corn dodgers the rest of my life.
Well, I guess it didn't play out so well for that fella.
I think a lot of people came out here, and then, of course, then came the land speculators. They came out, and for a fee, they'd find you a good land, you know. I guess this would, they would probably be the first realtor, and they were finding land and everything, and sometimes it just didn't work because there wasn't any water there, and some of these people just couldn't make it.
Well, you can tell because every little gully up here has a homestead in it, you know, and a lot of them. And you go on some of these older ranches and stuff, they just put together a bunch of different homesteads. But especially out towards Sutton Mountain, every other spot where there's just the slightest bit of water, there's an old homestead
and a flat land to put a little garden on.
Yep, and you know, like you could tell that those folks didn't. I mean, if it was thriving and they were able to survive, they'd still be there today. But it just was one of those things because this whole area was never inhabited by the Native Americans year-round anyways. This was just a hunting area.
They couldn't live here in the wintertime. I mean, they starved to death. So they would come up in the spring and dig their camas and stuff like that. But, you know, with all this stuff, with the Homestead Act and all this stuff and everything, you had a lot of illegality come into play. And some of the bigger ranches, they said, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to hire you to work for me, but I want you to file on this 160 acres over here. And we got this old cabin. We'll drag it over, and they put cabins on skids. They drag it over there and let it sit there long enough till they got the surveyor up and check this stuff all out. And then after 5 years, they would buy it from whoever homesteaded from it, and that's how a lot of these big ranches were put together.
Well, wasn't the Owens place just west of town? Wasn't that how that was established?
I wouldn't doubt it, because that's where a lot of them little homestead cabins you were talking about, that's where they turned up. But, you know, and then came, after it did start get it going pretty good, some of the bigger ranches got together, and they started with sheep. I'm not going to mention any names because some people tried to put that sheep thing behind them, some of the local people, but we still have a lot of sheep people that don't like sheep is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, because they said that they'd eat down the ground. And,
they're supposed to do all this bad stuff, and maybe they did. I don't know. It's not
well, at the time though, the wool, there was a bigger market for wool. Shaniko was, you know, that's where like one of the biggest. In the whole entire West, where you take your wool to ship it out.
It's the world's shipping center the world's largest shipping center of wool back in the day.
And so, I mean, the market was probably headed that direction, and it probably did that from like the homestead days up until the 50s, because the Cole brothers had sheep for up well until the mid 50s, probably, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, that's the reason that a lot of people got out of sheep. It's so labor intensive. They have to have so much help to handle the sheep and do all this shearing and herding and all this stuff and lambing and
you gotta move
marking and all that stuff. And most of these guys that got into sheep were from Tennessee and Kentucky. That's who settled this country. A lot of Tennesseans came out here to work in the sheep, and some of them, like your grandpa Cole, he started as a sheep herder and ended up with 2 or 3 bands and a real nice ranch and had a lot in the store and everything. He became quite an entrepreneur. But it was said that first came the Tennesseans, and they brought their knives. Second came the Kentuckians, and they brought their guns. And said lastly came the Okies, and they brought everything.
I guess that filled in the gap.
Yeah, right, yeah. But well, there were other people here, too, from Missouri, Virginia, North Carolina, and a smattering of inhabitants represented from all of the other little states. But I'd like to tell you a story now. It's what I call a border story. It's about a Kentucky. I heard it's from Kentucky. When I'm working a room, I try to find out in the audience who is more dominant, the Kentuckians or the Tennesseans.
Well, for the folks out there in the listening audience, Dad does do performances. He does his version of cowboy poetry.
Yeah, loosely cowboy poetry.
That's
my business card actually said convincing liar, and I've really turned it into an art form. But anyhow, back to the story. It said this Kentucky boy went out one day and he took his gun and he was hunting tree squirrels. So he was going to get them for dinner. So he went out and he shot 3 of the biggest old tree squirrels he could see, and he brought them back. And his dad just gave him holy heck about shooting each one of them tree squirrels in the head. He said, I was going to take the brains and brain tan those squirrel hides. So he sent the Kentucky boy back out, and he couldn't find any more tree squirrels, and he said he crossed over into Tennessee, and he had to shoot 5 Tennesseans to find enough brains to tan 3 squirrel hides.
Yeah, that's a pretty good old joke there.
Yeah.
I've heard, you could tell that just about across any border, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
That's steeped in the squirrel hunting tradition.
Well,
anyway.
you could even maybe change squirrels to rats or something. I don't know.
Rabbits, whatever you want.
Yeah. By this time, though, in about 1981 or 1881, had 2 general stores in Mitchell, a blacksmith shop, 1 hotel, and numerous dwellings. So they were morphing into a town from just a settlement. And flour was selling in Mitchell for $10 a barrel. Well, in 1881, that was a lot of money for a barrel of flour. And most of it was freight because it had to come all the way from the Dalles. So the people around here got together, raised $1,000, and they contracted with a guy named Max Putz to build a flour mill in downtown Mitchell.
They call that a grist mill?
Grist mill, yeah.
Grist, yes. Grits.
And it was at the east end of Mitchell, and it was powered up by the water that Sargent saw as a blessing when he first settled here. And so they went to grinding flour, and if you raised more wheat than what you could use, or rye, or whatever you wanted ground, he would barter with you, and he would take half of it for grinding the rest of it, or you could just pay him and outright. But a lot of people just traded back and forth, called the barter system.
Well, and isn't that the grist wheel itself? Isn't that underneath Judy Perry's house? Part of her foundation or something?
The foundation is set underneath that on the grist stones.
Foundation is used loosely, just a block in the corner holding up part of the house.
Yeah, most of these old houses were set up on blocks. The first serious fire they had in Mitchell was in 1881. Richard's store burnt to the ground. Also, his home was built into the store, but he immediately after he started to rebuild.
That was in 1881.
1881, and in 1884 they had like I said, they had a little flood, and they lost a couple homes, but it wasn't really serious. But the big one, and we'll cover that later in more detail, probably was in 1904 when they lost most of downtown, and 2 lives were lost in the flood.
And that was the only flood where lives were lost, correct?
Yeah. Now I don't know. I can't remember. 1884 might have been when they lost the Wilson family down at Painted Hills Way.
Okay, down there, probably the Bridge Creek Ranch.
Yeah, just to turn in the old house set right there where you turn into the Painted Hills today on that Painted Hills Road, and everybody else was gone. I think it was Election Day or something. Anyhow, the wife was home with the kids, and I think she got out 2 or 3 of the kids and went back to get them, and she didn't make it, and a couple of the smaller ones didn't make it. So I think there was 3 or 4 that were drowned.
Okay.
Water break.
Well, we got to keep hydrated. Good idea in these times when you could catch a virus.
Yeah.
Dad's got all these books. There's this really, really thick book. It's an old Central Oregon history book, and he pulls a lot of stuff from that.
Yeah, it's 1905.
Is that when that was written?
Yeah, that's when it was. That's when it was written, and it's up to that. It's got a lot of names and everything. If anybody that's interested in this program can ever find one of these, do not hesitate to get it. Also, a good reference book is the history of Wheeler County, Oregon, which is by Stinchfield.
Yeah, that came out in the 80s?
83, yeah.
83, I remember that.
And everybody wrote a little brief history here, or most people did, and so boy, it was really it's been a real good reference point for me, and I thank Mac and Jan for doing that for us.
Yeah, we'll one of these days put up a bibliography of all the sources that Dad draws from. Of course, some of them we probably won't have much because they're just anecdotal stories, and you really can't have a bibliography for BS. I mean, I guess you could. But
well, you could, but I don't know how you document it.
I guess that falls underneath the oral history.
Well, my business card says convincing liar, so
I mean, now you just made our podcast sound a little less legitimate there.
Well, the only time I lie is when it makes the story better.
I think that's when most people do. But Dad's been collecting reams and reams of history his whole life, and so that the facility of this podcast is to make use of some of that resource that he's stockpiled over the years.
Also, I've become somewhat of a philosopher. Some of this stuff I've written, some of it I've heard, some of it I've stolen.
Yeah.
So, the one like I have a anatomy solution.
Are you reading a poem now? Is that?
No, this is to live your life by.
Okay, this is philosophical points with Dan Cannon.
Yeah, right. Anatomical solution.
Okay.
You want to kick up your heels before you turn up your toes. When fantasy becomes reality, it brings disappointment. He had the first nickel he ever made. Unfortunately, he never made another one. Everyone is looking around for something they've already found. When he was born, you could tell his mother dropped him a lot. And I always wondered, when a woman gets her hair done, why did they call it a permanent when you know that ain't going to be the last one?
This is kind of like Deep Thoughts with Jack Handy.
Yeah, there you go. I came across this one, just looked in the back of a guy's truck one day, and it was full of beer cans. That's a redneck 401k plan.
Yeah, especially since how it went up to 10 cents a piece.
Yeah. Now, I stole this one. I want to give him credit here. I stole this one from Mel Tillis.
A great country singer.
Poor little Herman was so ugly that when he was born, that his mother packed him upside down for 2 weeks, thinking he's only born with one eye. This is something you will never see on a tombstone. He died of too low a cholesterol. He was so dumb, you couldn't stereotype him, you had to monotype him. He was so dumb that if you test him for his DNA, he'd only have D.
Did you write that one, or did you steal that one too?
No, I think I wrote that one. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Oh, that's pretty
just
good.
One of them things. Once in a while, they just fall out of the sky and hit you. Now this one I stole.
Okay.
If you're traveling through Arkansas and you mention anarchy, that just means another one. Do not get alarmed.
Oh, okay. So it's not anarchy.
Yeah, right.
The anarchist type of situation.
Yeah, the doctor told me, he said, I had to change my diet and I should start eating like a rabbit. So now I just use my front teeth.
All right, you got one more?
Yeah, nothing's worse than having close neighbors with a blind rooster. Let's see if I got anything more that just jumps out here. This is something that I always worry of. If someone's giving you an award, look out. They're looking for something else.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so with the history, though, we kind of concluded about, 1881?
Yeah, about 1881.
Okay. I wanted to make sure we kind of put that in there so we know where to pick back up when we do this again.
Yeah, we'll get some more stories out there for you. If we get enough interest, we'll keep this thing going.
Well, even if we don't, we got to do something during the lockdown.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're going to go nuts if we don't use our mind here and just worry about getting the virus.
Yep. Well, I guess we'll conclude it for today. But folks, stay safe out there and practice social distancing. And we'll be back with more. And you'll be able to find this podcast soon on all platforms. But for now, we're just kind of getting by. We might put it up on YouTube or something, but we will be out there, so never fret about that. What do you got, Dad?
I stole one more from Tennessee Ernie Ford. May the good Lord take a liking to you.
Well, we all would like that. All right, well, thank you, folks, and we'll catch you all later. Bye.